papers were still in her hand when she said it. "You need to move your fence. It's on my land." I actually laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because it didn't make any sense. My name is Vanessa Crawford. I'm 43 years old, and until that afternoon, I believed I knew exactly where my life stood, literally and figuratively. My husband Mark and I had lived in our home for 11 years. It wasn't just a house to us. It was something we built slowly, carefully, intentionally. Every plant in the yard, every board in that fence, every inch of that land felt earned. We bought this place when we were finally stable. After years of renting tiny apartments and counting every dollar, this house was our turning point. I remember standing in the backyard the day we moved in, barefoot in the grass, imagining barbecues, quiet mornings, maybe even grandchildren running around someday. That space, it meant safety, ownership, control. So when Helen, our neighbor of barely 6 months, stood there holding a folder and calmly told me part of my yard wasn't mine, something inside me rejected it instantly. "You must be mistaken," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't argue. That was the strange part. She just tilted her head slightly and handed me the documents. "According to the original boundary plan," she said, her tone almost polite, "this section belongs to my property. I'm planning to sell, so I need it corrected." Sell. That word stuck with me more than anything else. Not the accusation. Not the implication that we had somehow built on land that wasn't ours. No, her timing. I looked down at the papers, but the lines and numbers blurred together. My heart was beating too fast, my hands slightly trembling. None of this matched what I knew. What we had signed. What we had paid for. Mark had handled most of the purchase details back then. I trusted him. Completely. I never had a reason not to. "We've had that fence since we moved in," I said. "No one has ever said anything." Helen's expression didn't change. "Previous owners didn't notice," she replied. "Or didn't care. But I do." There was something in the way she said it. Calm. Certain. Like this wasn't a conversation. It was already decided. And for the first time, I felt something I couldn't quite explain. Not just confusion. Doubt. Because if she was right, then what else had we misunderstood all these years? And why did it feel like she had been waiting to say this? I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I kept seeing those papers every time I closed my eyes. The sharp lines, the official stamps, the quiet confidence in Helen's voice. It wasn't just what she said. It was how certain she sounded, like she had already won something I didn't even know we were fighting over. Mark tried to calm me down at first. "Vanessa, it's probably a misunderstanding," he said, leaning against the kitchen counter while I paced back and forth. "People get confused about property lines all the time." But there was hesitation in his voice. Subtle. Almost invisible. And I noticed it. "You handled the purchase," I reminded him, stopping to look directly at him. "You saw all the documents. There's no way something like this slipped through, right?" For a second, he didn't answer. It was quick. Most people wouldn't have caught it. But I did. "Of course not," he said finally, too quickly. "Everything was checked. Everything was checked. Not I remember. Not I'm sure. Checked." The word sat wrong with me, like a piece that didn't fit the rest of the puzzle. The next morning, I went outside earlier than usual. The air was still cold, the grass damp under my shoes. Our fence stood exactly where it always had, solid, familiar, something I had never questioned before. Until now. I walked along it slowly, running my fingers over the wood, trying to see it differently. Trying to imagine it wrong. But it didn't feel wrong. It felt like ours. That's when I noticed Helen standing on her side of the yard, watching me. She didn't wave. Didn't smile. Just watched. You should really start making arrangements, she called out after a moment, her tone almost casual. Buyers won't wait around for boundary disputes. Something in me tightened. This isn't settled, I said. She gave a small, almost sympathetic smile. It already is. You just haven't accepted it yet. That sentence stayed with me long after she went back inside. Because it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a fact. Later that afternoon, I pulled out the old house documents from the filing cabinet in our office. The folder was thicker than I remembered, filled with contracts, inspection reports, bank papers. Normal. Safe. Familiar. Until it wasn't. Because the boundary map, the one I clearly remembered seeing years ago, looked different. Not dramatically. Not enough to scream obvious fraud. But enough to make my stomach drop. The line wasn't where I remembered it. It was closer to the house. Much closer. And suddenly, Helen's words didn't feel ridiculous anymore. They felt possible. I sat there, staring at the map, trying to convince myself I was overthinking it. That memory can be unreliable. That stress distorts perception. But deep down, something colder had already settled in. Because if this document had changed, then when? And more importantly, who changed it? I couldn't shake the feeling. Something wasn't right. All morning, that map stayed in my head like a glitch I couldn't fix. I kept replaying it, comparing it to the version I remembered, trying to convince myself I was just misremembering details from 11 years ago. But the more I thought about it, the clearer one thing became. This wasn't just a vague memory. I knew where that line used to be. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office. I didn't tell Mark. I didn't even think about telling him. Something in me had already shifted from confusion to quiet investigation. The building smelled like old paper and dust, the kind of place where time feels slower. A woman behind the counter barely looked up when I explained what I needed. Property records are public, she said, sliding a form toward me. Just need the address. Simple. Routine. Which somehow made everything feel more unsettling. I sat at one of the long tables, scrolling through digital archives of our property. Purchase records. Tax filings. Survey reports. Each document loaded slowly, each one pulling me deeper into a quiet, growing dread. And then I found it. The original boundary survey. Dated the year we bought the house. My hands went cold as I opened the file. Because the line was exactly where I remembered it. Further out. Past the fence. Clearly, undeniably marking that section of land as ours. I stared at it, my heart pounding harder with every second. So I wasn't wrong. The document at home was. A strange mix of relief and fear washed over me. Relief that I hadn't imagined it. Fear of what that actually meant. Because documents don't just change. Someone changes them. I printed the file immediately, gripping the paper tighter than I realized as I walked back to my car. My mind was racing now, connecting pieces that didn't want to fit together. When I got home, Mark was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. That alone made my stomach tighten. "You went somewhere," he said, not looking up right away. It wasn't a question. I placed the printed survey on the table in front of him. "I went to the records office." That got his attention. His eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. "You didn't have to do that," he said, a little too quickly. "Didn't have to." Not shouldn't. Not why. "You said everything was checked," I replied, my voice calm but sharper than I intended. "So explain this." I watched his face carefully. Every movement, every micro-expression. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I saw something I had never seen before. Not confusion. Not concern. Recognition. Like he already knew what I was showing him. He leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly. "Vanessa, this isn't as simple as you think." My chest tightened. Because that sentence didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded like the beginning of something much worse. I didn't like the way he said that. Not at all. "It's not that simple," I repeated slowly, watching him as if I was seeing him for the first time. "Then explain it to me, Mark. Because right now, it looks very simple." He ran his hand over his face, avoiding my eyes for a second too long. That small pause, that hesitation, it said more than any words could. "When we bought the house," he began carefully, choosing each word like he was stepping through something fragile, "there were adjustments." Adjustments. My stomach dropped. "What kind of adjustments?" I asked, my voice tightening despite my effort to stay calm. He exhaled slowly, leaning forward, elbows on the table. The previous owner had some issues with the survey. There were discrepancies between older plans and the updated ones. The realtor said it was common. That it had already been handled. Handled. Everything with him suddenly sounded vague. Filtered. Safe. "And you believed that?" I asked. "I checked what I needed to check," he replied quickly. Too quickly. There it was again. That same phrasing. Not certainty. Not clarity. Distance. I crossed my arms, feeling something colder settling in my chest. "Did you ever see the original survey?" Silence. That was all the answer I needed. "You didn't," I said quietly. "I trusted the documentation we were given," he pushed back, his tone sharpening slightly. "We had a lawyer. We had a realtor. Vanessa, this wasn't just me guessing. But it was him signing. It was him deciding." "And now?" I asked. "Now we have a neighbor telling us part of our yard isn't ours, and documents in our own house that don't match the official records. You don't think that's a problem?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the paper again. Longer this time. Like he was calculating something. That's when the unease turned into something sharper. "Mark," I said slowly, "did you ever change anything in these documents?" His head snapped up. "What? No. Of course not." Too fast. Too defensive. "I'm asking because something is different," I continued, my voice steady but my heart pounding harder. "And you're the one who handled all of this." He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is getting out of hand," he said, running a hand through his hair. "You're jumping to conclusions because of one conversation with a neighbor who clearly has her own agenda." Agenda. So now it was about her. Not the documents. Not the discrepancy. Her. Then why are the records different? I asked, not raising my voice, which somehow made it worse. He didn't answer. And in that silence, something shifted between us. Because for the first time, I wasn't just questioning the situation. I was questioning him. And the worst part wasn't that I didn't understand what was happening. It was that a small, quiet part of me had already started to suspect. He might. The next few days felt different. Heavier. Like something invisible had settled over the house, pressing down on everything, our conversations, our routines, even the silence between us. Mark acted normal. Or at least, he tried to. He still made coffee in the mornings. Still asked about my day. Still turned on the TV in the evenings like nothing had shifted. But I started noticing the details I used to ignore. How he avoided certain topics. How quickly he changed the subject when I mentioned the fence. How he never once brought it up himself. Not once. And that, more than anything, felt wrong. Because if this was truly nothing, if it was just a misunderstanding, why wasn't he fighting it with me? Why did it feel like I was the only one trying to figure out what was happening? On the third day, Helen came back. This time, she didn't bring papers. She brought a measuring tape. I saw her through the kitchen window, walking slowly along the fence line, stopping every few steps, marking something in a small notebook. I stepped outside immediately. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't look surprised to see me. "Preparing," she said simply. "For what?" "For the sale," she replied, as if it was obvious. "My agent is coming next week. I need accurate dimensions." My chest tightened. "You can't just measure our property." She looked at me then. Calm. Almost bored. "It's not your property," she said. The words hit harder this time. Because now they weren't just words. They were becoming real. "I have the official records," I shot back, even though my voice didn't feel as strong as I wanted it to. She gave a small, knowing smile. "So do I." That smile stayed with me long after she left. Because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't aggressive. It was confident. Like she knew something I didn't. That evening, I tried talking to Mark again. "We need to handle this properly," I said, standing in the doorway while he sat on the couch scrolling through his phone. "We should get a surveyor. A lawyer. Something official." He didn't look up right away. "Let's not escalate this," he said finally. Escalate. The word made something inside me snap. "She's measuring our yard, Mark," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "She's planning to sell land that might be ours." "Might," he repeated quietly. That word again. Distance. Doubt. "Why are you talking like that?" I asked, stepping closer. "Since when are you unsure?" He finally looked at me. And for a second, just a second, he looked tired. Not confused. Not surprised. Tired. "Asking questions won't change anything right now," he said. That's when it hit me. He wasn't trying to solve the problem. He was trying to contain it. And suddenly, a new thought surfaced, one I hadn't fully allowed myself to consider before. What if this wasn't just about the land? What if Mark already knew exactly how this would end? Something didn't add up. Not in the documents. Not in the way Helen behaved. Not even in Mark's reaction. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table long after dinner, staring at the printed survey report we had ordered. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried more than just measurements and lines. It carried doubt. And doubt was something I wasn't used to feeling about my own home. She seemed too prepared, I said finally, breaking the silence. Mark looked up from his laptop, tired but attentive. Prepared how? She didn't hesitate. She didn't even question it. It was like she knew exactly what she was going to show us before we even asked. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Maybe she's just been waiting to bring it up. No, I shook my head. That wasn't it. People don't wait like that. Not for something this big. They either avoid it or explode. She did neither. She controlled it. The word lingered in the air longer than I expected. Controlled. And once I said it out loud, I couldn't unsee it. The way she stood. The way she held the papers. The way she looked at us, not angry, not emotional, but almost confident. Too confident. The next morning, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I went to the county records office myself. The building smelled faintly of dust and old paper, the kind of place where time moved slower and everything important was hidden in quiet drawers. I requested the original property records for both our house and Helen's. The clerk barely looked at me as she handed over a thick folder. Everything should be there, she said. I took a seat by the window, sunlight cutting across the pages as I opened the file. At first, everything looked normal. Purchase records. Previous owners. Standard survey documents. But then I noticed something small. A date. It was subtle. Easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. One of the documents Helen had shown us didn't match this one. The version in the official records had a different boundary line. Not drastically different. But enough. Enough to change everything. My heart started beating faster as I flipped back and forth between the copies I had taken photos of and the originals in front of me. Same layout. Same signatures. But one detail had been altered. I whispered it under my breath, barely able to process it. She changed it. The realization hit slowly at first. Then all at once. Helen didn't discover something. She created it. I closed the folder carefully, my hands suddenly cold. If she was willing to alter official documents, then this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was intentional. And I had a feeling we were only seeing the beginning of it. I didn't wait. Not this time. By the time I got home, the folder from the county office was still fresh in my mind, every detail burned into memory. I didn't want to sit on it. I didn't want to overthink it. If Helen thought she could control this situation, I was ready to break that illusion. Mark was in the living room when I walked in. Well? He asked, standing up immediately. I didn't answer right away. I just placed my phone on the table and pulled up the photos I had taken at the records office. Look at this, I said quietly. He stepped closer, leaning over the screen. His eyes moved slowly across the images, then back again. At first, I saw confusion. Then hesitation. Then something else. "You're sure these are official records?" he asked. The question hit me harder than I expected. "Yes," I said, sharper than I meant to. "I got them myself." He nodded, but not convincingly. "I'm just saying maybe there was an update. Or a correction we didn't know about." "No," I said firmly. "There wasn't. And even if there was, it would be documented. This," I pointed at the screen, "this is a change. A deliberate one." The room fell quiet. For a moment, I thought he would agree with me. But instead, he rubbed the back of his neck and said something that made my stomach drop. "Maybe we should talk to her again." Calmly. Talk to her. Calmly. After everything. I stared at him, trying to understand how we were standing in the same situation but seeing two completely different realities. "She forged documents, Mark." "We don't know that," he replied quickly. "Not for sure." The doubt in his voice wasn't loud. But it was there. And somehow, that hurt almost as much as what Helen had done. We went next door that evening. Helen opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been expecting us. "Vanessa," she said with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mark. I was wondering when you'd come back." I stepped forward before Mark could speak. "I went to the county records office today." Her expression didn't change. Not even a flicker. "I compared your documents to the official records," I continued, holding her gaze. "They don't match." Silence. A long, stretched silence. Then she tilted her head slightly, like she was considering something mildly interesting. "That's strange," she said calmly. Too calmly. "They should match." "They don't," I replied. "The boundary line is different. The version you showed us." "Are you accusing me of something?" She interrupted, her voice still smooth, almost gentle. The shift was subtle. But I felt it. The air changed. "I'm saying there's a discrepancy," I said carefully. Helen let out a soft, almost amused breath. "Vanessa," she said, stepping a little closer, lowering her voice just enough to feel personal, "do you have any idea how complicated property records can be?" I didn't answer. "People misunderstand these things all the time," she continued. "Old surveys. Updated plans. Clerical errors. It's not as simple as you think." I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't denial. This was redirection. "You're trying to confuse the situation," I said. Her smile widened just slightly. "No," she said. "I think you're confused." I heard Mark shift beside me. Not stepping forward. Not backing me up. Just there. And in that moment, something inside me shifted too. Because this wasn't just about land anymore. This was about control. And for the first time, I realized. Helen wasn't just trying to take part of our property. She was trying to make me question my own reality. The letter arrived 3 days later. Not in an envelope I recognized. Not with a return address I expected. It was thick. Official. The kind of paper that immediately makes your stomach tighten before you even open it. I stood by the front door for a moment, holding it in my hands, staring at my name printed neatly across the front. Vanessa Crawford. Something about seeing it there felt wrong. Like I was being pulled into something I didn't agree to. Mark was in the kitchen when I walked in. "What's that?" he asked casually. "I don't know," I replied, though a part of me already did. I opened it slowly. Inside was a formal notice. Legal language. Dense paragraphs. Cold, impersonal words that didn't care how they made you feel. I scanned it once. Then again. And then the meaning hit me all at once. "She's filing a boundary dispute," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark froze. "What?" "She's claiming that part of our land legally belongs to her," I continued, my fingers tightening around the paper. "And she's requesting a formal review with potential transfer of ownership." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Suffocating. "She's serious," Mark said quietly. I looked at him, something sharp rising in my chest. She was always serious. He didn't respond. And that silence said more than words. That afternoon, we met with a property attorney. The office was modern, clean, almost too calm for the storm building inside me. The lawyer, Daniel Reeves, listened carefully as I laid everything out: the documents, the discrepancies, the visit to the county office. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react much at all, which somehow made me more nervous. When I finished, he folded his hands on the desk and looked at us both. "This isn't just a disagreement between neighbors," he said. "I figured that," I replied. "This is a legal claim," he continued. "And from what you're describing, she's building a case." "A case based on falsified documents," I said sharply. He nodded slightly. "Possibly. But proving that is another matter." The words hit like cold water. "What do you mean?" Mark asked. "I mean," Daniel said calmly, "if she presents documents that appear valid, and if there's any ambiguity in historical records, this could turn into a prolonged dispute. Months. Possibly longer." I felt my chest tighten. "But the original records," I started. "Will help," he said. "But they're not the only factor. Courts look at multiple elements: past usage, prior agreements, maintenance patterns. If she can argue that the land was treated as hers for a certain period of time." "She hasn't," I said immediately. But even as I said it, a memory flickered. Helen gardening near the fence. Placing decorative stones. Extending her flower beds just slightly closer. Small things. Things I had noticed. And ignored. Daniel watched my expression carefully. "You see the problem," he said. I didn't answer. Because I did. On the drive home, the silence between Mark and me felt different. Not just heavy. Fractured. "This could get expensive," he said finally. I turned to him slowly. "That's what you're worried about?" "I'm being realistic," he replied. "Lawyers, surveys, court fees, this could drag on for months." "So what are you suggesting?" I asked, my voice tightening. He hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. "Maybe there's a way to settle it," he said. The words landed like a betrayal. "Settle it?" I repeated. "Just hear me out." "No," I cut him off. "You want to give her what she's asking for." "I want to avoid destroying ourselves over this," he shot back. I stared at him, my heart pounding. "She's trying to take our land, Mark." And I'm trying to protect what we still have, he replied. The car filled with silence again. But this time, it wasn't just tension. It was something worse. Distance. Because for the first time since this started, I realized I might not just be fighting Helen. I might be fighting alone. I couldn't let it go. Not after what the lawyer said. Not after the way Mark looked at me in the car, like this was already slipping out of our hands. That night, I barely slept. Every small detail replayed in my mind. Helen's calm voice. Her confidence. The documents. The way she never once seemed uncertain. People don't act like that unless they've done it before. That thought wouldn't leave me. So the next morning, I did something I hadn't planned. I knocked on the door across the street. Mr. Callahan had lived there longer than anyone else on the block. Retired. Observant. The kind of man who noticed everything but rarely said anything unless asked directly. He opened the door slowly, studying me for a moment before speaking. Vanessa, he said. Everything all right? I forced a small smile. I hope so, I replied. Can I ask you something about Helen? That was all it took. His expression changed instantly. Subtle, but unmistakable. What about her? He asked carefully. I hesitated for a second, then decided not to hold back. She's claiming part of our land, I said. Using documents that don't match the county records. He didn't look surprised. Not even a little. Instead, he sighed. That sounds like her. The words landed heavily. You've seen something like this before? I asked. He stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. His living room smelled faintly of old books and coffee. The kind of place that felt quiet, but full of history. I don't like getting involved in neighbors' business, he said as he sat down. But what you're describing, it's not new. My heart started to race. What do you mean? He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. The couple who lived in your house before you, David and Elaine, they had issues with Helen too. I froze. They never mentioned anything when we bought the place. They wouldn't, he said. By the time they sold, they just wanted out. A cold feeling spread through my chest. What kind of issues? I asked. He paused, like he was deciding how much to say. Small things at first, he explained. Disputes over the fence. Where it stood. Who maintained what. Then it escalated. Helen claimed a strip of their yard was hers. My stomach dropped. Just like now. He nodded. They fought it for a while. Got surveys done. Brought in lawyers. And? I asked, my voice tight. They settled. The word felt heavy. Settled how? They gave up part of the land, he said simply. Not much. Just enough to make it go away. I felt something inside me twist. Why would they do that if they were right? He looked at me for a long moment. Because it's easier, he said quietly. Easier than fighting someone who knows exactly how to wear you down. Silence filled the room. But that's not the worst part, he added. My chest tightened. What do you mean? He stood up slowly and walked to a small cabinet, pulling out a folder. These are copies of some notices they showed me back then, he said, handing them over. I opened it carefully. and what I saw made my breath catch. The documents looked familiar. Too familiar. Same formatting. Same structure. Same kind of adjusted boundary lines. It wasn't just similar. It was the same pattern. She's done this before, I whispered. Mr. Callahan nodded. And she got away with it. I stared at the papers in my hands, my mind racing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a one-time conflict. It was a strategy. Deliberate. Repeated. Calculated. And suddenly, everything became clear. Helen wasn't trying to resolve a boundary issue. She was creating one. Over and over again. Until someone gave in. I looked up slowly, a new kind of certainty settling inside me. She picked the wrong house this time, I said. But even as I said it, a question lingered in the back of my mind. If she'd done this before, how far was she willing to go now? The next move came faster than I expected. And it wasn't subtle. I woke up to the sound of metal. Sharp. Repetitive. Wrong. For a second, I thought I was still dreaming. But then it came again, louder this time. A heavy of something against something that didn't belong. I sat up in bed, my heart already racing. Do you hear that? I whispered. Mark groaned beside me, half asleep. What time is it? Another. This time unmistakable. I was already out of bed before he answered. By the time I reached the window, my hands were shaking. And then I saw it. Helen. Standing in our yard. Not near the fence. Inside it. A man stood next to her, construction gear, tools laid out on the grass. And between them, cutting straight across the line we had always known as ours, a new fence post. What is she doing? Mark said behind me, now fully awake. She's not asking anymore, I replied. I didn't even remember putting on shoes. I was outside within seconds, the cold air hitting my face as I crossed the yard. Stop! I shouted. The man paused mid-motion. Helen turned slowly, like she had been expecting me. Good morning, Vanessa, she said calmly. Get out of my yard, I said, my voice shaking with anger. This is not your yard, she replied, almost gently. I felt something snap inside me. You don't get to decide that, I said, stepping closer. Not like this. Not without a court ruling. Helen tilted her head slightly, as if I had said something mildly amusing. I've already initiated legal proceedings, she said. This is a temporary adjustment to reflect the correct boundary. Temporary? I repeated. You're building a fence. It's a marker, she corrected. The man shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware this wasn't just another job. He said quietly to her. Are you sure we should? Continue, she said, without even looking at him. I stepped forward again, my voice rising. I have proof your documents are altered. I've seen the official records. Helen finally looked directly at me. And for the first time there was something else in her eyes. Not calm. Not polite. Cold. Then you should present that in court, she said. Until then, I suggest you don't interfere with work being done on my property. My property. The words echoed in my head like something unreal. Mark stepped beside me. Helen, this is not okay, he said, trying to stay calm. You can't just come onto our land and start building. She turned to him, her expression softening just slightly. Mark, she said, almost sympathetically, you seem like a reasonable man. I felt it immediately. The shift. She wasn't talking to me anymore. She was talking to him. This doesn't have to become something bigger than it is, she continued. These situations can escalate unnecessarily. Legal fees, stress damage to relationships. I clenched my fists. Are you threatening us? I asked. She smiled faintly. I'm offering perspective. Mark didn't answer right away. And that silence, that hesitation, it hit me harder than anything she had said. Because she saw it too. I could tell. The way her eyes lingered on him for just a second longer. The way her tone softened just a little more. She had found the weakness. And she was using it. I think you both need to consider what this fight is worth, she said quietly. Then she turned away. Continue, she told the worker again. The sound of metal hitting the ground resumed. Louder now. Final. And as I stood there, watching a new boundary being forced into our lives, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a dispute anymore. It was a takeover. And Helen wasn't waiting for permission. I felt my chest tighten, the cold air cutting through my hoodie, my hands shaking with rage. Every nerve in my body screamed that this was the line I could no longer let anyone cross. Mark looked at me, eyes wide. Vanessa, calm down, he said, but his voice wavered. I could see it, the hesitation, the doubt he never admitted out loud. Helen had found it. That tiny crack in our unity. And she was using it like a scalpel. Calm down. I repeated, my voice rising. Calm down while she stomps over everything we've built? Our land, our home, our life? My words cut sharper than any metal. The workers froze. Even Helen blinked. I stepped forward, and Mark instinctively followed, though I wasn't sure if he was for me or for her. I had to make him see. Mark, we either stand together, or we lose everything. Do you understand? Or are you just going to let her take it? Helen's smile didn't waver, but there was a flicker in her eyes now, just enough to let me know she realized I wasn't bluffing. She tilted her head, almost amused. Vanessa, you're making this personal, she said. But sometimes personal is all that matters. Her words should have scared me. But instead, something shifted. A calm fire ignited in my chest. Years of being polite, of being underestimated, of letting neighbors and outsiders dictate boundaries, they ended now. I drew in a breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs, and spoke clearly, deliberately. No more. You are not moving this fence another inch without a court order. You hear me? She arched an eyebrow. And if I do? Then we'll see whose proof matters more. I'm not afraid anymore, I said. The words tasted like steel, like finality. Mark finally spoke. I'm with you, Vanessa, he stammered, and I saw relief, and guilt, in his eyes. He had been too passive for too long, and now he realized the line had been crossed. Helen's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened on the clipboard. The worker hesitated, glancing between us. Everything felt frozen, time itself holding its breath. I looked at our yard, at the crooked fence posts, at the boundary that had been violated. And for the first time in days, I felt in control. Not just of this land, but of me, of my decisions, of my voice. No more being walked over. No more silent compromises. I would fight. And I would win. The wind rustled through the trees, whispering around us, carrying the faint metallic sound of the work she refused to pause. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This battle had just begun, and I was ready to see it through. I didn't wait another second. That evening, I called our attorney, her voice calm but firm, absorbing every word. I explained everything. Helen's falsified maps, the threatening documents, her smug smile in the driveway. The attorney promised immediate action, and I felt a wave of relief and determination wash over me. Finally, a plan. The next morning, I walked the property line with Mark, measuring tape in hand. Every step felt heavier, laden with the weight of years we had invested in this home, in our land, in our life. This is ours, I said quietly, more to myself than him. Mark nodded, finally present, finally awake to the reality we had been ignoring. We took photos, documented every post and every inch of our property. I wanted irrefutable proof, something Helen could not manipulate. I uploaded the old survey documents we had found in the town archives, comparing them to her forged plans. It was meticulous, exhausting work, but each image and record felt like armor, protecting what was rightfully ours. Helen came by later, fuming, clipboard in hand, attempting to intimidate us. I didn't flinch. The lawyer has seen these, I said, motioning to the documents spread across the porch table. Any further attempts, and you'll be answering in court. She laughed, a sharp, forced sound, but her eyes betrayed her doubt. She knew I wasn't bluffing. Mark finally spoke up, asserting our boundary in a way he never had before. I could feel the power shift. This was no longer a conversation about civility or compromise. This was about truth, ownership, and respect. Over the next days, we reinforced the fence, clearly marking our boundary with bright posts and official signage. I even hired a surveyor to place permanent markers, ensuring Helen could not challenge us again. Each act, each step, fortified my confidence, each decision a reclaiming of control. The most satisfying part? Watching Helen's reaction. Her smirk faded, replaced by tight lips and subtle glances. She had underestimated us, underestimated me. I felt an unfamiliar but thrilling sense of empowerment, the kind that comes from standing your ground and refusing to be bullied. By the end of the week, the threat of Helen's claim had been neutralized. Our attorney had filed notices, our land was clearly demarcated, and for the first time, I truly felt secure in my home. But more than that, I felt secure in myself. This was a victory not just for the land, but for my voice, my decisions, and the life Mark and I had built together. I looked over the yard, at the firm lines of the new fence, and smiled. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the tension, leaving a calm clarity behind. I had taken action. I had drawn the line. And I was ready for whatever came next. The house was quiet that evening. I sat on the porch swing, looking over the yard, and finally let myself breathe. The tension that had been coiled inside me for weeks began to unwind, replaced by a deep, satisfying calm. Every inch of the land was ours, marked clearly and protected, but more importantly, I had taken back my sense of agency, my voice, my life. Mark came out, coffee in hand, and we sat together, watching the sunset spill gold across the fence lines. He squeezed my hand, and I realized how much we had grown, how much we had both changed through this ordeal. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. And I knew it wasn't just pride in me, it was pride in the partnership we had rebuilt, stronger than before. I thought back to the fear and anger I had felt when Helen first confronted us, the doubt that had crept into my mind as I questioned whether our memories, our documents, and our rights were enough. But every step we had taken to reclaim control, every call to the lawyer, every reinforced post and survey marker, had reminded me that strength isn't just about confrontation, it's about persistence, courage, and patience. I realized something else. Boundaries are not just lines in the dirt, they are statements about who we are and what we value. We had protected our land, yes, but we had also protected our dignity, our home, and the future we were building. Helen's deceit had tried to shake that, but it had only shown me how resilient I could be when pushed to my limits. That night, I walked through the house, touching the walls, remembering every late night and weekend spent nurturing our home and garden. The echoes of laughter, arguments, planning sessions, they all belonged to us. No one could take that from us. And as I looked out the window at the stars, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had faced deceit, confrontation, and fear, and I had come out whole, stronger, and unshakably in control of my life. In the days that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. I was more vigilant, more assertive, and more confident. Neighbors who once whispered now nodded respectfully. I could finally enjoy the fruits of our labor, not just the property itself but the victory of reclaiming what was ours and proving, most importantly, that I would not be undermined or intimidated. I smiled, knowing this wasn't just about land. It was about standing tall in a world that sometimes tries to push you down, about valuing your voice and defending it, no matter the odds. Our home was safe. Our future was secure. And I had never felt more capable, more proud, or more alive.